This is Jacob's Algebra, Chapter 13, Lesson 6, Part 3, continuing on with completing the square. Now, in the Part 2 video, we stopped with number 9, Part C. The instructions for number 9 say solve each of the following quadratic equations by completing the square. Remember that number 9 is just like number 16 that I assigned for homework. So we're going to work through just a couple more parts from number 9, and then we'll do a couple of parts from the last problem as well. So let's look now at number 9, part F. Number 9, part F is x squared minus 6x minus 9 equals 0. Now, since we're supposed to solve this by completing the square, that means we need to make sure that our left side only has x terms. So that means I need to add 9 to both sides. So when we do that, we'll get x squared minus 6x equals 9. Now I need to complete the square on the left side. So I'm going to draw my parentheses and put my square up there. What is the square root of x squared? That's x. Now we take our second term, which is negative 6x. We divide it by 2 to get negative 3x. And now we divide it by the x that's in the parentheses. So negative 3x divided by x is negative 3. And now we're going to square what we have in the parentheses. We've got to make sure our first two terms match what we have up above, and then we'll have a third term that we'll be adding. So x squared is x squared. 2 times x times negative 3 is negative 6x. So that matches. That's good. That means we're doing this right. And then we square our last term. Negative 3, when we square it, is a positive 9. So we already had a 9 on the right side. Since we added 9 on the left side, that means we have to add 9 on the right side as well. So x minus 3, when we square it, is going to be 18. Now we have our x in a square on the left side, so we can take the square root of both sides. Okay, the square root of x minus 3 squared is just x minus 3. And then the square root of 18 is plus or minus the square root of 18. Now, 18 can be simplified, so we can rewrite this as plus or minus the square root of 9 times 2, because 9 times 2 is another way of writing 18, and 9 is a square factor. When you take the square root of 9, you get 3, so we'll have plus or minus 3 times the square root of 2. So I'm going to rewrite this as x minus 3 equals plus or minus 3 root 2. Now, this is what x minus 3 is. I need to find out what just plain x is. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and then I'll have x equals 3 plus or minus 3 root 2. And that's as far as I have to take this. So once we get the right side to where there's a radical in it, and we've simplified the radical, and there's no fraction left, then we're done. So that's our answer for number 9, part F. Now let's take a look at number 9, part G. For number 9, part G, we have 9x squared minus 6x equals 35. So I'm going to draw parentheses with a square. Remember, you always skip a space right beneath so that you have room to put the multiplied out square up there. So the first thing in our parentheses is going to be the square root of our first term. The square root of 9x squared is 3x. Don't forget you have to take the square root of the number in front of the x squared also. Now we take our second term and divide it by 2. Negative 6x divided by 2 is negative 3x. Now we divide it by our first term in the parentheses. Negative 3x divided by 3x is going to give us just a negative 1. So now we need to square what's in the parentheses. Our first two terms should match, and then our third term will be what we add to both sides. So when we square 3x, we get 9x squared. Don't forget we're squaring the entire thing. That means squaring the 3 as well as the x. Now we need to find 2 times 3x times negative 1. That's negative 6x. And then we square our last term. Negative 1 squared is a positive 1. Since I added 1 to the left side, that means I need to add 1 to the right side. 35 plus 1 is 36. Now that our x is in a square on the left side, we can take the square root of both sides. So when I do that, I end up with 3x minus 1 on the left side. On the right side, I end up with plus or minus 6 because remember, this 3x minus 1, we don't know whether it's positive or negative because when we square it, we'll always end up with a positive. So we have to allow for it to be either positive or negative. Now this is 3x minus 1. So to find out what 3x is, we need to add 1 to both sides. When we do that, we will get 3x equals 1 plus or minus 6. Now this is what 3 times x is. I need to find out what just plain x is. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3, and I will end up with x is equal to 1 plus or minus 6 over 3. So let's see what these two values are. 1 minus 6 is negative 5, and negative 5 divided by 3 is negative 5/3. 1 plus 6 is 7, and 7 divided by 3 is a positive 7/3. So negative 5/3 and positive 7/3 are our two answers for number 9, part G. Let's do one more part from number 9. Let's look at 9H. 9H says 16x squared plus 40x plus 11 equals 0. So in order to do completing the square, I need to have only x terms on the left side. So I'm going to subtract 11 from both sides so that I have only x terms on the left side. So when I do that, I'll have 16x squared plus 40x equals negative 11. Now I need to write my parentheses and write my square. I'm going to take the square root of the first term. The square root of 16x squared is 4x. Now I take my second term and divide it by 2. 40x divided by 2 is 20x. Now I divide it by the first term in the parentheses. 20x divided by 4x is going to be 5, and it's a positive 5 because this is positive. Now I need to square out my what I have in the parentheses. My first two terms should match what I have up above, and my third term is what I'll add to both sides. When you square 4x, you get 16x squared. 2 times 4x times 5, that is 40x. And then 5 squared is 25. I'm going to copy my negative 11, and then I'm going to add 25 because I need to do that on the right side since I did it on the left. Negative 11 plus 25 is 14. So I have my x inside of a square on the left side. That means I can take the square root of both sides now. When I do that, I end up with just a 4x plus 5 on the left side. On the right side, I have plus or minus the square root of 14. Don't forget the plus or minus. Now to get my x term by itself, I need to subtract 5 from both sides. So I will have 4x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 14. Now I need to divide both sides by 4. And I will end up with x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 14, all of that over 4. And that can't be simplified, so that's as far as I can go here. So this was number 9, which is just like number 16 that I assigned for homework. Okay, now let's look at number 10. Number 10 is just like number 17 that I assigned for homework. It says solve the following equation. So we're just going to do parts A and D here. Part A has x minus 2 times x plus 6 is equal to 10. Now we cannot use the square root method here because we don't have a square on the left side. What we need to do first is multiply out our left side. X times x is x squared. X times 6 is 6x. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And negative 2 times 6 is negative 12. And then that equals 10. So on my left side, I'm going to end up with x squared. Let me make that look more like an x. Plus 4x because 6x minus 2x is 4x. And then because I want only x terms on the left side, I'm going to add 12 to both sides to get 22 on the right side. Okay, now what I need to do is complete the square. So I'm going to draw my parentheses with my square. The square root of x squared is just x. 4x divided by 2 is 2x, and then when we divide it by x, we end up with just 2. So now I'm going to square this out. X, when we square it, is x squared. 2 times x times 2 is 4x. And then we square our last term, which is 4. We can see that we added a 4 on the left side, so we're going to add 4 on the right side. So that means that x plus 2 squared must be equal to 26. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. On the left side, we have x plus 2. On the right side, we have plus or minus the square root of 26. Now to get the x by itself, we need to subtract 2 from both sides, and we get x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 26. The square root of 26 cannot be simplified because it does not have any square factors. Now let's look at number 10, part D. And this is the last one that we're going to look at. Number 10, part D is 3x times x plus 4 is equal to 2 times x squared minus 1. So when we multiply this out, 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 4 is 12x. 2 times x squared is 2x squared. 2 times a negative 1 is, whoops, that's a negative 2, not a negative 1. Okay, now we need to get all of our x terms on the left side. So I'm going to subtract 2x squared from both sides, and that will give me x squared plus 12x on the left side. And then that's going to equal negative 2. So I'm going to complete the square on the left side. The square root of x squared is just x. 12x divided by 2 is 6. And then when we, it's 6x. And then when we divide it by x, we get 6. So this should be x plus 6 inside the parentheses. So x, when we square it, is x squared. 2 times x times 6 is 12x. That matches what we have above, so that means we've done this right so far. 6 squared is 36. So we can see that we added 36 on the left side. On the right side, we already had negative 2, and then we need to add 36 there also. Negative 2 plus 36 is 34. We have our x inside of the square on the left side, so that means we can take the square root of both sides now. On our left side, we end up with x plus 6. On the right side, we have plus or minus the square root of 34. To get the x by itself, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So we get x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 34. And that's our final answer for number 10, part D. So this one is just like number 17. Remember, whenever you are trying to complete the square, you need to have all your x terms on the left side and all the numbers, just plain numbers, on the right side. When you go to complete your square, make sure that you draw your parentheses. Whoa, I didn't mean to draw that. Draw your parentheses skip a line and draw your parentheses 2 lines below with a square. The first term in your parentheses is going to be the square root of the first term that you have above. For the second term in your parentheses, you need to take your second term, divide it by 2, and then divide it by the first term in your parentheses. That should give you your second term. Then you multiply out what you have inside of these parentheses to make sure that it matches. Your first 2 terms should match. Your third term is what you're going to add to both sides. Once you've got your x inside of a square on the left side, then you can take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus, and solve for x.